People say family is a safe harbor, but I was never allowed inside. For 10 years, I played the invisible child, silently packing my bags every summer so my parents could take my brother on luxury vacations. They thought I was a naive pawn. They never realized isolation is the perfect place to learn how to flip the board. Pour a bourbon. Let me tell you how I returned to force them to burn down their own brilliant stage. Hello, wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for your continuous support. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating, which means we will be forced to stop uploading new videos here in the near future and will transition our work entirely to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon, where you will find even better, longer, and more incredibly detailed exclusive true stories that we cannot share publicly on YouTube, complete with a full cast of emotional voice actors. You can join us right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description and pinned comments. Now, let us dive into today's tale, a story that begins with a little girl named Farrah Horton. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Scottsdale, Arizona, meant living in a world of endless sunshine, manicured lawns, and glass-walled houses that reflected perfect lives. But in the Horton household, the sun only truly shined on one person, my older brother, Leo. By the time I was 9 years old, Leo was already a teenage tennis prodigy, the golden boy whose trophies dictated the rhythm of our entire existence. I was just Farrah Horton, the quiet, observant shadow lingering in the background of his victory photographs. Every year, as the desert heat of early June began to bake the pristine asphalt of our driveway, my parents, Arthur and Diane, would execute their annual ritual. They would pack my small pastel suitcase, print out a boarding pass, and put me on a flight heading north. My destination was a perpetually foggy coastal town in Oregon to stay with my Aunt Celeste. Celeste was my mother's estranged sister, an eccentric but undeniably warm woman who made her living crafting theatrical props for regional theater companies. My parents always painted this banishment with the thickest coat of sugary deceit. "This is your special summer reward, Farrah," my mother would coo, adjusting my collar with a perfectly manicured hand at the departure gate. "You get to have a magical time exploring the beach and playing with Aunt Celeste's art supplies, while Leo has to stay behind and endure those grueling training camps." It was a beautiful lie, delivered with the practiced ease of people who believed their own performances. The reality, as I would later understand, was that while I was breathing in the damp, salty air of the Pacific Northwest, Arthur and Diane were packing designer luggage for themselves and Leo. They were embarking on lavish vacations, thinly disguised as international tennis tournaments. While I collected seashells, they were sipping champagne in luxury suites in Europe, soaking up the sun on private beaches in Hawaii, or shopping in the towering malls of Dubai. The illusion shattered completely the summer I turned 11 years old. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting on the plush beige sofa in our Scottsdale living room, waiting for the airport taxi, flipping idly through one of my mother's glossy lifestyle magazines left on the coffee table. A piece of folded paper slipped from between the perfume-scented pages and fluttered to the hardwood floor. It was a credit card statement. I picked it up, my eyes scanning the heavily itemized lines of text. There, printed in stark black ink, was a massive charge for a 14-day stay at a prestigious 5-star resort in Monaco. The detail that made my breath catch in my throat was a simple, numerical note next to the reservation. Guests, 3. I stared at the word 3 until the letters began to blur. 3 people, Arthur, Diane, and Leo, a perfect complete family unit, enjoying the Mediterranean coast, while the 4th, inconvenient member was shipped off to a dusty workshop in Oregon. In that quiet, air-conditioned room, a normal 11-year-old child might have burst into tears. They might have run into the master bedroom, waving the paper, demanding an explanation, or begging to be included. I did none of those things. I carefully folded the statement exactly as I had found it and slipped it back between the pages of the magazine. I chose absolute silence in that defining moment. My childish innocence evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I realized my true value in this family. I was not a beloved daughter. I was a logistical nuisance, a heavy piece of luggage that needed to be checked into a storage locker whenever the real family wanted to enjoy their glittering, high-stakes life. When I arrived in Oregon that year, Aunt Celeste greeted me with her usual warm hugs and the smell of paint thinner. But I noticed something I had missed before. She knew. She knew exactly what my parents were doing, and a profound, silent guilt hung over her. Whenever my parents were mentioned, she would suddenly find an excuse to look away, busying herself with a papier-mâché mask or a wooden sword. She was a complicit warden in my gilded exile, too dependent on my parents' financial stipends to ever rock the boat. Yet, despite her silent betrayal, Aunt Celeste's sprawling, chaotic prop workshop became my ultimate sanctuary. It was a place where things were not expected to be perfect, only functional. Since she could not give me the truth, she gave me unfettered access to her tools. I started by taking things apart: old radios, broken stage lighting systems, discarded animatronic parts. I learned how things were built, how they broke, and how they could be rewired to serve a completely different purpose. It was in that dusty, dimly lit garage that I met Elias, a grumpy, retired engineer in his late 60s, who occasionally did contract work for Celeste's more complex mechanical props. Recognizing a fellow quiet soul with a sharp mind, Elias took me under his wing. He did not just teach me how to solder wires, he introduced me to the glowing, infinite world of computer programming, while my brother was busy serving aces on the sun-drenched courts of the world. I sat in the foggy darkness of Oregon, typing lines of code into a bulky second-hand laptop, slowly and meticulously assembling my own invisible wings. The summers that followed were no longer a punishment. They were my incubator. I shed the skin of the naive, heartbroken younger sister and fully embraced the invisibility they forced upon me. Back in Arizona, I played the role of the unremarkable, painfully average high school student with clinical precision. I kept my grade point average hovering exactly at a calculated B+. I wore dull beige cardigans, spoke in quiet, non-committal murmurs, and blended perfectly into the sterile walls of the school hallways. I gave my parents exactly what they wanted: a background character who demanded zero attention. But the second the airplane tires kissed the damp Oregon runway, my real life began. Elias's old laptop became the gateway to a subterranean world. I moved rapidly past basic coding and plunged headfirst into the adrenaline-fueled architecture of cybersecurity. I learned network topologies, complex encryption protocols, and the silent art of vulnerability exploitation. To the untrained eyes of my parents during their brief check-in phone calls, I was just a boring teenager reading young adult novels in a dusty garage. In reality, I was navigating the dark web, stress-testing firewalls on rented servers across the globe, and learning how information could be manipulated, hidden, or weaponized. My fingers flew across the worn plastic keys in a relentless, silent drumbeat of progress. I was building armor. I was building a weapon. I was not just learning for the thrill of the puzzle. I was engineering my own permanent extraction. My target was independence, absolute and untraceable. Every night, while the dense Oregon fog rolled against the garage window panes, I scoured the internet for full-ride scholarships in data science and computer engineering. I ruthlessly filtered my applications, targeting university programs in cities that felt like different solar systems from the manicured lawns of Scottsdale. I needed concrete jungles, massive populations, brutal winters, and places where a person could vanish completely into a sea of strangers. Then came the day of my high school graduation. It was a suffocatingly hot afternoon in late May. Arthur and Diane were completely in their element, armed with expensive digital cameras, meticulously curating content for their vast social media feeds. They pulled Leo in for tightly framed, brightly lit selfies, beaming with synthetic pride to broadcast the illusion of our flawless, high-achieving family unit. They barely noticed when I slipped away from the metal bleachers before the final speeches even concluded. While they were busy choosing the right digital filters to make their smiles look more authentic, I walked 3 miles under the blazing desert sun to the local bank branch. Standing at the polished wooden counter, I calmly instructed the teller to liquidate the entirety of my checking and savings accounts, money I had painstakingly hoarded from 3 years of tutoring underclassmen and walking the neighbors' dogs. The teller handed over a thick stack of bills. The cash felt heavy. It was tangible freedom slipping right into the bottom of my faded canvas backpack. I did not attend the extravagant graduation after-party hosted at our exclusive country club. Instead, I walked back to the empty, echoing house. I left my pastel suitcase sitting in the back of my closet, a relic of a life I was discarding. I packed only the absolute bare essentials into a single duffel bag. On the gleaming white marble expanse of the kitchen island, I left a single piece of lined notebook paper. I did not write a manifesto. I did not demand apologies. My message was exactly 5 words long. Do not look for me. I popped the tiny plastic SIM card out of my smartphone, snapped it perfectly in half, and tossed the jagged shards down the kitchen garbage disposal. I left the expensive phone sitting right next to the note. By midnight, I was sitting by the window of a red-eye train. I watched the sprawling desert landscapes fade into pitch black, the rhythmic, metallic clacking of the train tracks carrying me straight toward the towering, illuminated skyline of Chicago. It is almost comical how utterly predictable my parents were in the aftermath. They did not call the police the next morning. They did not mount a frantic, tearful search across the city. They waited an astonishing 3 weeks before finally making a hushed, deeply reluctant phone call to Aunt Celeste. And even then, their primary concern was not my physical safety or whether I was lying dead in a ditch. It was the growing whispers of the country club wives who had noticed my prolonged absence. When the local authorities eventually looked into my disappearance, the conclusion was swift and utterly uninteresting to the detectives. I was legally 18 years old. There were no signs of forced entry or foul play, and I had left a crystal-clear note of intent. The detective closed the file almost as soon as he opened it. But Diane could never tolerate a narrative she did not personally control. To explain away the sudden, embarrassing absence of her only daughter to the judgmental high society of Scottsdale, she masterfully fabricated a brand new tragedy. She began telling everyone, with perfectly practiced, welling tears in her eyes, that I suffered from a severe, congenital mental illness. She whispered to her friends that the pressure had finally broken my fragile mind, and that I had run away to join an extreme religious meditation group in the mountains to find my true self. It was a flawless, beautifully tragic lie. It completely absolved them of all parental neglect and recast them as the long-suffering, heartbroken parents of a troubled child. I let them have that beautiful lie. I was too busy building my new empire to care. 6 years evaporated into the biting, electric winds of the Midwest. I am 24 years old now, and the mousy, invisible girl from the desert is dead and buried. I traded my dull cardigans for tailored charcoal blazers and chopped my hair into a sharp, icy platinum blonde cut that perfectly mirrors the steel and glass architecture of my new reality. The suffocating, manufactured silence of my youth was completely replaced by the chaotic, beautiful roar of Chicago. I did not just survive my escape, I conquered the city. I am now a senior risk data analyst at VortexSec Analytics, a premier cybersecurity firm handling crisis management and data breaches for massive global corporations. I spend my days predicting disasters, analyzing threat vectors, and untangling colossal webs of digital chaos. My relentless drive afforded me a stunning loft apartment on the 32nd floor. Every morning, I stand before my floor-to-ceiling windows, drinking a black espresso while watching the sunrise over the vast, turbulent expanse of Lake Michigan. It is a monument to my absolute, unshakable financial independence. Sharing this high-altitude sanctuary is Julian. Julian is a commercial architect, a man who makes his living designing structures built to withstand immense external pressure. He is deeply calm, possessing a quiet, observant strength that perfectly grounds my high-speed mind. More importantly, Julian is the only human being alive who holds the complete, unedited blueprint of my history. I told him everything one freezing November night, sitting on our living room rug, and he simply held my hand, completely unfazed by the shadows of my origin story. As for my former bloodline, they were systematically scrubbed from my internal hard drive. I severed every digital and physical tether, routing their names into mental spam filters and erasing any trace of the Horton identity from my public footprint. The only ghost of a connection I ever permitted was a single, generic holiday postcard mailed to Aunt Celeste every December 25th. It never contained a return address or a personal message. It was merely a silent ping to an old server, letting her know I was still breathing, while ensuring nobody could ever track my location. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, my brother's tennis career had not just succeeded, it had violently exploded into the stratosphere. Leo was no longer a local Arizona prodigy. He was a global athletic brand, securing massive endorsement deals and Grand Slam titles. Consequently, my parents finally achieved their ultimate dream of becoming high society royalty. The three of them became permanent fixtures on the glossy covers of elite sports and luxury lifestyle magazines. Every now and then, while waiting for a latte at my neighborhood cafe, I would see their faces beaming from a magazine rack. I would see Arthur and Diane draped in designer clothes, standing proudly behind Leo as he hoisted another silver championship trophy into the air. But looking at those perfectly curated images felt exactly like looking at stock photography. My heart had completely calloused over, leaving no room for bitterness, jealousy, or even nostalgia. The anger had burned out long ago, leaving behind a profound, impenetrable peace. I genuinely loved my life. I had achieved the ultimate victory, because I had simply walked off their chessboard and built an entirely new game of my own. The illusion of safety always shatters from the inside out. For my brother, the shattering began on a Tuesday morning with a catastrophic digital failure. The sports management agency representing Leo, a colossal firm handling the careers of the most elite athletes on the planet, fell victim to a devastating ransomware attack. Hackers bypassed their legacy security protocols, locking down millions of files, highly confidential endorsement contracts, private medical records, and unreleased sponsorship strategies were suddenly held hostage. Panic rippled through the sports industry. Within 12 hours, VortexSec Analytics was contracted to neutralize the threat. Given the high-profile nature of the leak, I was immediately assigned as the lead incident commander. We scheduled an emergency briefing, a massive multinational video conference to outline our containment strategy to the agency board and their top-tier clients. I sat in my glass-walled office in Chicago, pulling up the grid of 75 video tiles on my ultra-wide monitor. I was halfway through explaining the architecture of the zero-day exploit when my eyes scanned the gallery view and froze. Tile number 42. There he was, Leo. He was sitting in what looked like a plush, mahogany-paneled home office, and right behind him, hovering like anxious ghosts, were Arthur and Diane. They looked older, their faces etched with genuine terror over the potential leak of Leo's private financial data. I did not stop talking. My voice remained a flat, authoritative monotone as I detailed the encryption algorithms we were deploying. But on the screen, a silent explosion was occurring. Leo had switched his screen to speaker view. I watched his eyes lock onto my face. I watched his eyebrows pull together in a violent knot of confusion. The platinum blonde hair and the sharp corporate armor were new, but the bone structure and the cold, unblinking stare were unmistakable. His mouth fell open. He grabbed his father's sleeve, pointing a shaking finger at the monitor. Arthur leaned in, squinting at the screen, and then all the color instantly vanished from his face. Diane gasped, her hand flying to her throat. They were staring at a ghost who had suddenly materialized at the head of a multi-million-dollar corporate rescue operation. I felt a dark, thrilling rush of adrenaline, but I did not let a single muscle in my face twitch. I looked directly into the camera lens, delivering complex technical directives with brutal, icy efficiency. "We expect full containment within 48 hours, I stated clearly. my eyes boring a hole straight through their digital window. Any questions should be routed through your legal department. Thank you for your time. I terminated the connection. The screen went black. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and took a slow, deep breath, letting the silence wash over me. The bomb had been planted. Now, I just had to wait for the detonation. It took exactly 3 days. A torrential downpour was washing the streets of Chicago gray when my desk phone rang. It was the lobby concierge. "Ms. Horton, there is a Mr. Leo Horton here to see you. He says it is a family emergency." I had flown across the country. I grabbed my blazer, took the elevator down 32 floors, and walked into the sprawling marble lobby. Leo was standing near the security turnstiles. He looked completely out of place, his expensive designer jacket damp from the rain, his posture screaming with nervous, frantic energy. When he saw me approach, he looked as if he might faint. I did not hug him. I did not smile. I simply nodded toward the revolving doors. "There is a coffee shop across the street. Let us go." We sat in a secluded corner booth. The air was thick with the smell of roasted espresso and the hiss of the milk steamer. Leo stared at me, his eyes darting frantically over my tailored clothes, my expensive watch, and the calm, unwavering expression on my face. The sheer reality of my existence was breaking his brain. He cracked first. His confusion rapidly morphed into defensive anger. "How are you here?" he hissed, leaning across the small wooden table. "Do you have any idea what you put Mom and Dad through? After everything they did for you? After all the money they spent trying to keep you alive?" I froze. My coffee cup stopped inches from my mouth. I set it down very carefully. "Keep me alive? Leo, what exactly are you talking about?" He let out a bitter, disbelieving laugh. "Do not play crazy with me. Farah, the autoimmune disease, the treatments. They told me everything when you ran away. They told me how sick you were your whole life, how your lungs were so weak that you had to go to Oregon every single summer because the specific marine climate was the only thing that kept you out of the hospital." I stared at him, absolutely speechless. The sheer, psychopathic brilliance of Arthur and Diane's fiction left me breathless. "They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on experimental specialists for you," Leo continued, his voice trembling with righteous indignation. "And then, after all that sacrifice, your mind just broke. They said the illness caused a severe psychotic episode. They said you ran off to join some insane cult in the mountains. Mom cried for months. And now I find you sitting in a skyscraper in Chicago, running a tech firm." The silence between us stretched tight, vibrating with tension. I looked at the man sitting across from me. He was not a monster. I was just a golden retriever who had been fed poisoned meat his entire life. I leaned forward, folding my hands neatly on the table. "Leo," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper, "I have never been sick a single day in my life." He blinked, shaking his head. No, that is a lie. The summers in Oregon were a dumping ground," I interrupted sharply. "They sent me to Aunt Celeste's dusty, moldy garage because they did not want me ruining their perfect vacation pictures. Do you remember the summer I was 11? You went to a tennis camp in Europe." "Yes," he stammered. "In France. It was Monaco," I corrected him. "And it was a 5-star luxury resort. I found the credit card statement hidden in Mom's magazine. The reservation was explicitly booked for 3 guests. They did not send me away for my health. Leo, they sent me away because I was heavy luggage. They threw me in the closet so they could parade you around the world without distractions." The physical reaction was instantaneous. I watched the blood drain out of Leo's face, leaving his skin the color of ash. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "There was no cult," I continued, striking the final, fatal blow to his reality. "There was no psychotic break. I saved my own money, packed a bag, and took a train to Chicago because I realized my parents were perfectly happy to pretend I did not exist. So I gave them what they wanted. The story they told you was just a pathetic script they wrote to cover up their own cruelty and protect their precious social status at the country club." Leo slumped back against the leather booth. His hands were shaking violently. He stared out the rain-streaked window, his eyes wide and vacant. The foundation of his entire universe was collapsing in real time. He was finally realizing that his glorious, sun-drenched life, his trophies, and his perfect family image were entirely built on the deliberate, systematic banishment of his own sister. The golden boy was finally seeing the blood on his crown. After I left Leo, staring blankly into the rain, I walked back to my office building, my mind, trained to detect anomalies and pattern deviations, was buzzing with a dark, intrusive thought. Arthur and Diane were cruel, yes, but they were also incredibly image-conscious and financially calculating. The lie they spun to Leo about my imaginary autoimmune disease was too elaborate. Why invent a story that involved hundreds of thousands of dollars in fake medical bills? People usually invent lies to cover up a deficit, to explain away missing resources. My analyst intuition screamed that there was a massive variable missing from this equation. I waited until the office emptied out for the evening. The city lights of Chicago glowed beyond the glass walls as I locked my office door and booted up my private terminal. At Vortex Sec Analytics, I had top-tier clearance to access global financial databases, tracing offshore accounts and corporate shell structures to recover stolen corporate assets. Tonight, I was redirecting that massive surveillance apparatus toward my own bloodline. I started pulling the Horton family's financial records from 10 years ago. It required stepping into a gray area of hacking, bypassing standard authorization protocols to resurrect archived bank statements, tax returns, and legal filings. I spent 6 hours diving down a digital rabbit hole, following a complex web of wire transfers that Arthur had carefully obfuscated. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, the decryption software finally cracked a secure legal archive from Maricopa County. A document snapped open on my screen. It was a last will and testament belonging to my paternal grandfather, a wealthy real estate developer who had passed away when I was 7 years old. I scrolled down the legal jargon, my eyes scanning the heavily redacted lines until I found it. Section 4. A trust fund. My breath caught in my throat as I read the beneficiary designation. It was not left to the family estate. It was not left to Leo. It was established exclusively in the name of Farrah Horton. The initial deposit was staggering, $2 million. I sat perfectly still, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. I cross-referenced the trust account numbers with the historical wire transfers I had just unspooled. The truth hit me with the blunt force of a physical blow. My parents did not just abandon me. They robbed me blind, over the course of 10 years. Arthur and Diane had exploited their legal guardianship to systematically drain every single cent from my trust fund. They forged my signature on release documents. They funneled the cash through dummy accounts under the guise of medical expenses for their sick daughter. But the money never went to doctors. I tracked the outbound transactions. The dates matched perfectly with Leo's timeline of success. The stolen funds paid for elite European tennis coaches. They paid for first-class flights to Dubai. They funded the lavish country club memberships, the designer wardrobes, and the endless champagne toasts. My grandfather had tried to secure my future, and my parents had cannibalized it to build a golden throne for my brother. My hands were shaking, not from sorrow, but from a terrifying, white-hot rage. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called in 6 years. The phone rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "Hello?" "Aunt Celeste," I said, my voice eerily calm. "It is Farrah." I heard a sharp intake of breath, followed by the clatter of something falling on a hardwood floor. "Farrah? Oh my God, you are alive. Where are you?" "I know about the trust fund," I interrupted, slicing straight through her emotional shock. "I know about the $2 million. I just need to know one thing. Did you know?" A suffocating silence stretched across the line. Then, the sound of quiet, broken weeping began. "I am so sorry," Celeste choked out, her voice trembling with decades of repressed guilt. "I am so sorry, Farrah. I found out the summer you turned 12. Arthur slipped up and mentioned the account. When I confronted them, Diane turned into a monster. She told me that if I ever breathed a single word of it to you, She would use their lawyers to cut off my visitation entirely. She said she would ensure I never saw you again, and she would pull the financial support keeping my workshop open. I was terrified. You were my only connection to my sister. I thought keeping you safe in my garage was better than losing you forever. So you let them steal my life, I stated coldly. I wanted to tell you, she sobbed, but by the time you turned 18, you were already gone. Please forgive me. I ended the call without another word. I dropped the phone onto my desk and stared out at the sleeping city. For 6 years, I had prided myself on my silence. I had convinced myself that walking away was the ultimate victory, that building my own life from scratch was enough. I was wrong. Walking away was just a trauma response. They had not just ignored me, they had financially mutilated me, stealing my childhood, my inheritance, and the only shred of love my grandfather had tried to leave me. They built an empire on my stolen bones, smiling for the cameras while I learned to survive in the dark. The peaceful, detached Farah. Horton died in that office at 3 o'clock in the morning, my silence shattered into 1,000 razor-sharp pieces. I did not want to hide anymore. I wanted my pound of flesh. I wanted them to pay, and I was going to make sure the cost would completely bankrupt their perfect, counterfeit lives. 2 months later, the dry heat of Arizona felt entirely different against my skin. It was not the oppressive cage of my childhood. It was a stage waiting to be set ablaze. The Horton family was hosting their crown jewel event, a massive, black-tie charity gala at the most exclusive resort in Scottsdale to launch the Horton Scholarship Fund. It was a masterclass in hypocrisy, designed to cement their legacy as philanthropic saints. Julian stepped out of the black town car, offering me his hand. I wore a floor-length backless gown the color of midnight. My platinum hair swept up in a sharp, elegant twist. I looked nothing like the discarded ghost of their past. We approached the velvet ropes. The security guards scanned their digital tablets. They did not blink twice when my name flashed green with top-tier VIP clearance. I had spent 15 minutes the night before quietly inserting myself into the master guest list server. We walked into the grand ballroom. It was a sea of crystal chandeliers, flowing champagne, and the absolute elite of the sports and business worlds. Hundreds of cameras flashed as reporters documented the flawless Horton family. A hush fell over the room as Arthur and Diane took the center stage, standing beneath a massive LED screen displaying the foundation's new logo. Diane stepped up to the microphone. She wore a stunning diamond necklace, looking every inch the grieving but resilient matriarch. "Tonight is about giving back," Diane began, her voice quivering with perfectly rehearsed emotion. "It is about the noble sacrifices of parenthood. Many of you know our son, Leo, and the heights he has reached, but few of you know the quiet heartbreak our family has endured. Our sweet daughter, Farah, battled a terrible, invisible illness for years. We gave everything to save her, but tragically, her mind could not bear the weight, and we lost her to the wilderness of her own mind." She paused to wipe a single, elegant tear from her cheek. The audience let out a collective murmur of sympathy. It was time. I reached into my evening bag, pulled out my phone, and pressed a single button on a customized application I had written. Behind my mother, the giant LED screen violently glitched. The soft, touching video montage of a tennis racket and charity logos dissolved into a blinding burst of digital static. The sound system emitted a sharp, high-pitched whine, silencing the room instantly. Then the true presentation began. In crisp, high-definition resolution, the screen illuminated with the heavily redacted pages of my grandfather's will, zooming in directly on the section establishing a $2 million trust fund in my name. The slide shifted, displaying side-by-side comparisons of the forged signature on the withdrawal slips, next to Diane's own handwriting. The final slides were the most devastating. I displayed massive bank transfers routed from my trust fund directly to elite tennis academies and luxury travel agencies, juxtaposed with glittering vacation photos of Arthur, Diane, and Leo smiling on yachts in Dubai and balconies in Monaco. The photos clearly displayed the digital timestamp and the booking details. Guests, exactly 3. A stunned, suffocating silence descended upon the ballroom. Diane turned around, her face instantly draining of all blood. Arthur stood frozen, his jaw completely slack. I released Julian's arm and walked down the center aisle. The click of my heels echoed like gunshots in the dead quiet of the room. The crowd parted instinctively as I climbed the carpeted steps and walked directly up to my mother. She was trembling so violently she looked as if she might collapse. I gently pried the microphone from her rigid fingers. I turned to face the hundreds of confused, horrified guests and the sea of wide-eyed reporters. "Good evening," I said, my voice projecting crisp and unwavering through the state-of-the-art sound system. "My name is Farrah Horton. I am the tragic, sick daughter you were just crying over. As you can clearly see, I am very much alive, and I have never been sick a single day in my life." Camera flashes began to erupt in rapid succession, turning the ballroom into a strobe-lit frenzy. "For 10 years, I continued, making deliberate eye contact with the wealthiest donors in the room. These 2 individuals banished me to a garage in Oregon every summer. They did not do this to protect my fragile health. They did it so they could steal $2 million from a trust fund left to me by my grandfather. They forged legal documents and drained every single penny to finance their son's tennis career and their own insatiable appetite for luxury. The tears you saw tonight were not for me. They were just part of a carefully rehearsed performance to steal even more money from all of you under the guise of a fraudulent charity." I looked down at the front row. Leo was standing there. He looked at the massive screen, filled with the undeniable proof of his stolen legacy. He looked at his parents, who were now cowering behind the podium, completely unable to utter a single word of defense. Leo did not shout. He did not jump on stage to protect them. He simply shook his head, his eyes filled with absolute disgust. He turned his back on the stage, shoved past a group of reporters, and walked out the grand double doors of the ballroom. He severed the final thread of their perfect family right in front of the entire world. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Journalists were shouting questions over each other, demanding statements from the paralyzed couple on stage. Donors were angrily calling their assistants to pull their checks. The flawless Horton empire was burning to the ground in real time. I turned to Arthur and Diane one last time. They looked small, pathetic, and completely ruined. I offered them a polite, chilling smile. I set the microphone neatly down on the podium. I walked down the steps, where Julian was waiting with a proud, quiet smile. I slipped my arm through his, and we walked smoothly out of the venue, leaving the screaming press and the ashes of my parents' destroyed lives far behind us. The next morning, I boarded a flight back to Chicago. I was finally, absolutely, and permanently free. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for staying with me until the very end of this journey. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please let me know down in the comments if you found today's story captivating. I must remind you that our channel has unfortunately been demonetized, which means we will not be uploading new videos here in the coming time. We are moving our operations entirely to Patreon. Please help us keep these stories alive by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon, where you can listen to the absolute best, longest, and most detailed exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen right now, or by using the link provided in the video description or the pinned comments. Thank you again for your incredible support, and I cannot wait to share our next journey with you over on Patreon.